Andiamo zitti la mano, perché lo stiamo facendo una balla, ma si vede che molla, mi sembra molla per sopra la si vuole la mattina, quando facciamo la mattina, cosa ci può la mattina.
Welcome back to Communicology. Today I'd like to talk about something that might sting a little bit because, quite frankly, we all suffer from this, and that is the concept of owning your mistakes. I've made plenty of mistakes. I've made little ones, I've made massive ones, and a whole bunch in between. You have done the same. We don't like to admit that we have made mistakes, but the truth is, we all have. Not one single person is perfect. Everyone has made multitudes of mistakes. You've probably made many already today. And depending on what time of day you're listening to this, you could just be in the tens or you could be in the thousands, depending on how your day is unfolded. But the thing is we don't like to own them. And there are many reasons why. And let's talk about those a little bit, because quite frankly, owning mistakes is a very important part of us being responsible to one another and also for our growth as human beings. So let's talk about those, shall we? So when it comes to making a mistake, now, of course, it could be some little involuntary slip up that we made, or it could be something that we maliciously did, or something in between. But you think of all the things that we've done wrong. Think of ways that we've said things that have hurt other people, actions that we've done that have hurt other people, or just some other little slip up that inconvenienced people or caused them some kind of distress. We don't have to think of mistakes as like this little, oops, I cracked an egg and spilled it on the floor, or, something major like, I told a major lie about you and spread a rumor about you kind of a thing. It could be all kinds of different things. So there could be little accidents that happen, like Bob Ross is talking about happy little accidents in his paintings. It's still a mistake. And we make lots of those. And sometimes, unfortunately, we make lots of the big ones too. Think of how many times you slandered somebody, said something terrible about them, either to their faces or just behind their backs. Or maybe the things that you posted on social media that weren't very pleasant. And even about people you don't even know. You don't have to make a mistake and cause a problem against someone you absolutely know. You could be someone that you don't know. Like you see a news story, or you see some kind of thing about a politician or an athlete or something like that, and it's some famous person, and you say something, negative and awful about them. At what point are we just venting and blowing off steam and actually doing something serious? And the truth of it is we don't get to hide behind excuses that, well, I just wanted to vent a little bit. Then that means you should be totally okay with people venting against you. Now, of course, we don't like that. Have you ever noticed that when it comes down to the idea of justice and the idea of mercy, we tend to always side on the side of justice whenever someone harms us, but mercy when we harm other people? Now, if you think about justice and mercy, justice simply defined is getting what we deserve. So if you are speeding and you get pulled over, the question at hand is, were you speeding? Yes or no? Because if you were, you broke the law. And if you broke the law, whether you meant to be speeding, you were just out joyriding and forgot to look at the speedometer, or you actively, were speeding and intending to speed, the question at hand is, did you break the law? So if it's a 55 mile an hour speed limit, you go 56, you're speeding. You are violating the law. Justice demands that you are punished accordingly, so you pay the ticket for whatever the ticket happens to be. Now, mercy is when we don't get what we deserve, or we get what we don't deserve. So the cop who gives you the verbal warning and lets you go, that's a lot of mercy right there. And if you've ever been on that situation, you understand how merciful that is, because you do deserve the ticket. Now, whenever we hurt other people, we expect them to be like, well, it's just no big deal. I just said some words, or I just did this action. Show me a little bit of mercy here. But when people hurt us, boy, we really quickly want we want them strung up. We want them, handled. We want them disciplined to the fullest extent of the law. So we want that extreme justice. But what if we just tried working on one, not making the mistake in the first place, and two, actually when we made mistakes, we owned them. Now, owning a mistake can come in a couple different flavors. We have the apology, and we also have what's known as apologia. We can talk about that in a minute. And of course, ultimately, you can have denial of the mistake as well. But if you're looking more towards the positive side of things, we have apology. Now, apology is an expression of sincere remorse, and it's acknowledging that you did the offense, and then pledging to right the wrong, and showing sincere remorse for it. Now, think how many times you've actually ever given a true apology. How many times has this one ever been given to you? Most people, whenever they're pushed into situations, they give what's known as apologia or apologia, depending on how you wish to pronounce the word. But apologia is apology with defense. So you see logos inside the word apology. Logos is in there. So we have the word in there, and apologia, it's the word with defense. So you're defending what you did, or what we try to say instead, I just want to explain what I did. So, whenever people say, don't give me excuses, we love giving excuses because we feel the need to justify why we did. Like, I said that awful thing about you because. It's like, well, again, when you get pulled over for speeding, it doesn't matter if you have you're running late to an appointment, or if someone's in the hospital and you're trying to get there. At the end of the day, the situation is, did you speed or not? Yes or no. And that's the offense. So whenever you say something mean to someone else, we always say, well, I didn't mean to do that. I was just upset at the moment, or I was having a bad day. So does having a bad day mean justify you're allowed to say those bad things? Now, again, if the person's very gracious and they wish to offer us mercy, they could say, I understand, I've had bad days too. Please don't do it again. Oh, no, I won't. If they're being, like I said, very merciful towards us. But they don't have to be, because again, if I want to truly apologize, I should be, one, acknowledging I did it, and B, showing true remorse, and C, trying to correct the thing. So what am I trying to do here whenever I say, I'm sorry I did this thing, it's because I was this. We think we're trying to explain it, why we did it, but the real issue is, did we do it or not? Did we do the offensive thing? And oftentimes, we don't like to go that far. In fact, a lot of times we don't even like to go that far at all, and we don't even like to apologize. You think of when little kids get in trouble and the mother or father swoops in and says, you two, stop fighting. Now shake hands and say you're sorry. And they both go, sorry, I'm sorry. And you can tell they don't mean it. They don't mean it. You're trying to teach them to apologize. But in that moment, all they're doing is just learning how to blurt out, I'm sorry, to make mom or dad happy. And that solves the problem. But does that really treat the issue? Does that really give a lifelong lasting lesson? And typically, no, it does not. You might have a situation where people just refuse to ever apologize. And the truth of the matter is, when it comes down to the idea of doing this, it's called accountability. Like, I am accountable for my actions. If I've got another excuse or a reason or a justification, I'm trying to find something to push the accountability away from me. I said this awful thing because I'm an awful person. I mean, whoever says that is, I said this awful thing because I was mad that day, or because you did this thing and made me want to lash out at you. It's never I responded in an awful way because I'm awful. Yeah, who says that? I mean, we don't say that. We definitely don't like saying that to each other. But again, accountability, it's my fault. That's such a weird and refreshing thing when people say that, because it's not common. I was one time when I was working, I used to work at a rental store. We rented out equipment and other kinds of things like that. And I had made a mistake, and my boss was ready to just lay into me and just lecture me about making the mistake. And I just said, you're right. I made the mistake. I'm sorry. And I'll work to make sure I don't do that again. And you could tell he was just like he really wanted to tear into me. He was ready to. because he was ready for me to say, but I didn't mean to, or whatever, or that wasn't my fault or whatever. But you just tell he just wanted to say something. And then it's almost like you can just see the wall breaking down, that like his anger wall was breaking down, because he was ready for me to come up with the typical human response is, hey, don't look at me, it's not my fault, when it truly was my fault. I did make the mistake, so I apologized and worked to not do that again. And he was just, you could just see the relief start to wash over him as that anger wall started to break down. And, we're still friends today. We still get along well today. And, it's just one of those things that those kind of things help relationships so much more. But the reason why we don't do it, of course, is pride. We don't want to admit that we're wrong. We don't want to admit we make mistakes. We don't want to admit that we cause problems. We like to think that we are as just pure as the wind-driven snow. And anything that happens to us is clearly someone else's fault. So anytime you had an argument with somebody and you're trying to confront them, most people don't want to admit and take any kind of accountability. It's like they're kryptonite, because they don't want to admit that maybe they did do something wrong, that maybe they have been a bad person, or that they said a bad thing, or whatever the thing happens to be. But that pride kicks in because we don't like to admit that we're wrong. We don't want to be held accountable. We hate when people point out our faults. We hate when people tell us that we're doing the wrong thing. We flee from it. But again, if we want to look at, say, like from a scriptural standpoint, Proverbs tells us that, that the wise person takes correction, and the one who avoids correction is stupid. And, when I first came across that verse, I thought, wow, the Bible calls people stupid. That's pretty harsh. Maybe it's just the translation. And I checked translation after translation after translation, and pretty much every one of them had the word translated as stupid. Maybe there's something to be learned there, that if you don't want correction, you're stupid. Now, no one likes that thought. I mean, I don't like people calling me stupid. And it's a bit of a slap in the face to hear that. But it's meant to slap you in the face. Why would you not take correction? Why would you not want to learn from a mistake? Again, if you think that you don't make mistakes, or that your mistakes aren't really that big of a deal, or it's always someone else's fault, well, you're lost. And frankly, you're stupid. You need to learn to stop being stupid and start learning and go for wisdom. So if you think of stupid, we think of it as an insult, which, rightfully it is. But if you think of it as a measure of intelligence, you've got wisdom on the higher end, and then you got stupid down here. And people who have wisdom get there because they have had lots of education, lots of experience, and they've been mindful of both of those. So they take all of the things that they've learned in their education, all the things that they've observed and gone through because of their experience, and they synthesize those, they mash them together, and then they end up having more wisdom. They become wise. So it's hard for, of course, someone really young to be wise, but it's important to teach them how to be wise. So when you have someone who's 5, instead of forcing them to say, I'm sorry to each other, and shake hands as if like that's going to make it all better, it's better to sit down with them and say, look, this is what happened. This is why what happened was wrong. This is why you were wrong. And it's important for you to admit and understand that you were wrong. And when you apologize, this is what an apology is and what it means. Because if we start doing that with young people, and then we keep holding to that standard as we keep getting older, you're going to find it much better down the road. So when they're 20 and they make mistakes, or 30 or 40 or 50 and they make mistakes, they're much more ready to go along that wise route instead of being stupid. Because it's quite easy to be stupid. I mean, it's incredibly easy to be stupid because we're all prideful. We all are just absolutely burdened with pride. And frankly, we idolize ourselves. And we think that I couldn't have made a mistake. It couldn't be my fault. And you see that kind of thing happen. And, whenever we do that, make that mistake, it's important to move to the next level of recognizing it, to take accountability. And then once you start taking accountability, that's not just a limited thing. Like, I will apologize for this much and this much only. It's like, what is the totality of my mistake? What is the totality of my error? What led to that error? What did I do wrong? Other errors that snowballed, and it got to that point where, you take that little snowball and start rolling it. Next thing you know, it's this big monstrous thing or an avalanche. What have you done? So going back and taking accountability for all of it, not just that final result or that bit of hurting you at the end. You'll oftentimes people say, I'm sorry if you were offended. It's like, no, the reason why you're apologizing is because someone was offended. It's not because they might have been. So you're apologizing because someone was. So let's back that up. What did you do? Don't just apologize for the offense, for that they felt offended. What was the offense and what led to that offense? So let's go back and be accountable for all of it and recognize that. I've seen people, strive to get out of trouble by saying, I'm only going to confess the stuff that, the bare minimum to get out of this trouble. And I've seen people fall for it because they just wanted to hear the apology and quickly move on instead of saying, but there's more here. You did all these other things too. And I've seen people quickly and work very hard to try to paint themselves as a victim or let others paint themselves as a victim. So if you know you did something wrong and someone says, okay, that's all right, you were a victim in all this. No, you know that you were the one that caused the problem. Don't allow yourself to be painted as a victim because that's you ducking accountability. So you need to learn how to be accountable and be able to just say everything that you've done. Now, I don't want to say this as in like you, like I'm saying in this video, because it's also me. I have done many things that, I've made, like I said, small mistakes, massive mistakes, everything in between. I've had to learn what it means to be accountable. I've had to learn what it means to suck it up and just take my lumps and just admit what's wrong. And what I did was wrong. Are there always situations and things that have maybe driven you to a certain way? Sure. But if I'm going to apologize, I'm going to apologize for what I did. If the other person's compelled to apologize for what they did too, that's on them. I can't force them to, but it's also wrong for me to use that as my explanation. Like I shouldn't lean on that. Like I only did this because you did this to me first. That's not an excuse. We're not turning the other cheek whenever we're using someone else's actions as our springboard for doing something wrong. So we have to stop cold and say, what I did was wrong, period. Full stop. End it right there. And that's the heart of true apology. Because when we start trying to go for the I didn't mean to do this, or I only did it because, we get ourselves in that situation, that never-ending loop of never taking accountability. And you'll have some people just flat out, I didn't do anything wrong. And they refuse to apologize, even though they did. And that's also, improper too. And it's not a healthy place to be either, because deep inside here, maybe deep down, maybe even in your heart, you know if you did something wrong, it's time to step up and clear that, not to clear your name, but to clear your guilt and to admit the things that you've done wrong. You can only wait so long, and it just becomes meaningless at that point, because everyone knows the deceptions out there. Everyone knows the lies out there. Everyone knows the offenses out there. When are you going to admit it? So accountability is a very hard thing to deal with. It's a hard topic because we don't like it. We like ourselves way too much. We like to be prideful, and we like to think that we don't do things incorrectly. We don't like to think we're wrong. We definitely don't like to be in trouble. I mean, I remember as a little kid, in third grade, Mr. Hutchison, I remember being in the corner one time because of an outburst in class. And I didn't like being in the corner, but it taught me, don't do outbursts in class so you don't end up in the corner. So, whenever you have those bumps and things in your life, learn from them so you can correct and not make mistakes. But it's also very, very important that when you do make mistakes, be accountable. Admit it. Admit the totality of it, not just a smidgen. Like I'm only going to admit as much as I have to. At the end of the day, you still have unresolved guilt that you have not dealt with. And you know it, and chances are the other person does too, and they're wondering why you're not coming forth with it. So it's important to be accountable to to yourself, accountable to others, ultimately accountable to God, because he sees every mistake you make. But at the end of the day, you are responsible for you. The other person is responsible for them. You always are the one who has to be accountable and say what you need to say. And if you're lucky, the other person will be merciful. They'll be gracious. If you're not lucky, they'll want justice. But at the end of the day, justice is what you deserve. So we can be hopeful for mercy. We can be hopeful for that grace. But we do deserve that justice. And when people come to us and admit faults to us, we then could also demand justice, or we could choose to be merciful. That choice is up to you in that moment. And of course, it comes down to whether or not the person is truly apologetic, or if they're disguising it in apologia, or if they're refusing any kind of accountability whatsoever. So it's important for people to come to us to be able to move to that next stage of forgiveness and reconciliation and restoration of the relationship. Because as long as there's something in the way, as long as there's that sin that keeps blocking us, as long as there is that offense that happens, it's hard to move forward. So again, own your mistakes. It's important to do that. You'll grow. It'll be bumpy. It'll be hard, but it's a good learning experience, and it'll teach you, how to live better in the future, and also how to treat other people when they make mistakes towards you. So thank you very much for tuning in today. As always, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you didn't like what you heard today, that's okay. I thank you for tuning in this long anyway. But we'll see you next time on Communicology.